The last time I spoke to Professor Morandi, he explained to me that Israel was going to try to wage a larger war, that this would expand beyond Gaza and the West Bank. And that is exactly what we see happening at this point in time. Now, there was an explosion or several explosions of pagers in Lebanon. And then also there were explosions of walkie-talkies. From what I understand, over 450 people have been injured in Lebanon. Let's get into this clip here from CNN. They are sending out a warning to the Biden administration. I'm surprised they brought this gentleman on, but sending out a warning to the Biden administration that Israel is waging a large scale war, and this is going to be very problematic for all parties involved. Let's get into it.
The confusion, the panic that is ensuing that happened on Tuesday, now continuing on Wednesday as we're getting these early reports of further explosions. What does that tell you? There have been a lot of questions about timing, about, the why now of it all. What is your sense for the timing?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the why now. There's at least two hypotheses out there. One is that this is very much an opening salvo, a prelude for a much broader war that is yet to come. It is reminiscent for those of us who are students of the Middle East of perhaps the preemptive attack Israel carried out in the Six-Day War in '67, or even if we remember 9/11. I mean, Al-Qaeda had a preemptive attack in Afghanistan, killing their adversaries there before going ahead and conducting the major attacks in New York and DC. So those are the kinds of actions that usually are a signal of a broader operation to come. And there's certainly a lot of fear both in Lebanon, but also throughout the region and in world capitals that in fact might be the case. The other option, and we've seen some reporting in Al Monitor and other outlets on that, is that the network that Israel had actually used to install these improvised explosive devices within these walkie-talkies and these pagers was about to be uncovered by Hezbollah, and therefore they needed to act. We won't know. But certainly Israel is making all the moves militarily, including today announcing it's moving tens of thousands of troops from Gaza to its border with Lebanon. It's making all the right moves to convince and warn Hezbollah that it is ready for a broader war.
So this idea to convince and warn, is there a scenario that you see playing out where this does actually act as a deterrent?
Well, yes, Hezbollah and Iran are, in a sense, already very much deterred, maybe not as deterred as Israel would like them to be. But we know that the Iranians and Hezbollah, but the Iranians in particular, have a preference for indirect warfare as it relates to Israel. They are militarily, and now we know also in the intelligence world, inferior to the Israelis. So they rely on a network of proxies and militant groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Syria and Iraq, to take the fight to Israel through 1,000 cuts, rather any kind of direct knockout blow. So time and again, and as Israel escalates to establish, and I would argue it already has, escalation dominance, we see Hezbollah and Iran shrinking back from that all-out war scenario. And arguably, that only encourages Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu to push further.
So let's just comment about that for just a second. First of all, what happened in Lebanon is incredibly dangerous. The fact that hundreds of people were injured by these explosions. And of course, Israel's going to say that they're targeting Hezbollah, just like they say when they bomb, hospitals and these babies in Gaza, that they're targeting Hamas. This is not something to be played with. And they may say, well, Hezbollah is shrinking back, Iran is shrinking back. But sometimes that is done to give you the illusion that they're not going to fight back. And then when you least expect it, they do. I would not get hopeful if I were Israel about Hezbollah not issuing a response. Because at this point, Israel is a bully. And what kills me is that the U.S. government just expects all of these other countries that Israel is attacking. The U.S. government just expects them to sit there and take it and get beat up while Israel continues to kill civilians. And I don't care what political party you're a part of, that's a problem. And as long as the U.S. government continues to give Israel weapons and refuses to hold Israel accountable, there's nothing they can do. Kamala Harris told you herself There is nothing Israel can do that would change my support for Israel. And the reality is the majority of politicians in DC feel that way. There's nothing they can do that would change their support. That is a dangerous precedent. Imagine if you're that country and you're told that by a country that pretty much wants to be the leader of the world, and they're the ones giving you the weapons. Well, that tells you that you're invincible, that you can do whatever you want to do. You know, at first, it was all about we're going after Hamas. You're over in Lebanon. Hamas is in Gaza. You're over in the West Bank. So as I said before, Netanyahu had laid this out so clearly that the greater goal was to establish a greater Israel, which includes part of Lebanon. And nobody is trying to stop Israel. This is insane.
And Nick, I should point out all of this playing out, of course. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the region. He was very clear in speaking with reporters in Cairo when he arrived that the U.S. didn't know about this, had not been informed about the attack Tuesday. But this is also putting a strain on that relationship.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's been fairly clear, I think, since the Israelis assassinated the key negotiator of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu was pursuing its own agenda and perhaps less fussed as to what that did to the diplomacy that the US has invested so much of itself in. And we have seen in the past week increasingly signs that diplomacy, for the Biden administration at least, might be reaching the end of the road. They're still very fervent in their desire for some kind of ceasefire deal. That's at the heart of all the messaging you hear. But the phrase, the need for political will, has kept emerging just, I think, recently today from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And that may just be a subtle probe, not only at Benjamin Netanyahu, who many's political fate has been staked in terms of how long this conflict continues. The day after the war ends is the day, of course, when the reckoning for how October the 6th even began for Benjamin Netanyahu. But there are also, too, I think many analysts who look at exactly the position Hamas are in, their leader Yahya Sinwar, as to his fate, too, in the event of some calming of the conflict, suddenly becomes something significantly more complex already.
Let's pause here for a second. It's just insane. And I want to say something about the ceasefire. This whole idea of negotiating a ceasefire, how are you negotiating a ceasefire if Israel is still killing people? How are you negotiating a ceasefire if you're still giving them weapons, which I've said over and over again is BS? How are you negotiating? We got to get a deal on the table. That's all we keep hearing, right? I don't believe they're trying to get no deal on the table. How are you getting a deal on the table and people, they're killing people in Lebanon? This has nothing to do with Hamas. This is insane. So now they're like, oh, well, we're trying to take out Hezbollah too. So first it was Hamas, now it's Hezbollah, even though, never forget this, and I covered this a while back, that Israel was attacking Lebanon over and over and over again. And then the moment that Lebanon responds, they're like, oh my God, they responded. How dare they? Like, Israel just wants to be able to beat people up and they don't want you to respond. So this is insane. So this whole, we're trying to make a deal with the ceasefire. Guys, we've heard this for months. Do you guys realize it is now September 19th? We're not far away from October 7th. That means it would have been a year. This is insane. This could have been done.
When we first began speaking, when the news of this first broke, the attack that we saw on Tuesday, a number of civilians hurt, 2 children among the 12 who were killed. Is there a sense yet today about sort of how widespread the impact of yesterday's attack is on Hezbollah?
No, and I think that's one of the outstanding questions in this. We have a death toll of 12, but it isn't clear amongst those 12 how many of those are Hezbollah members, and indeed if the 12 encompasses all the dead and injured, including those in the militant group. They were, it seems, pretty much the target. It was pages they were using that were impacted. But I should point out, it's clear that civilians, 2 children, according to Lebanese government officials, also hit, 2 children killed by them. So
children are not Hezbollah. You see what I mean? Children are not Hamas. Children are not Hezbollah. Like, this is dangerous. Like, we're talking pagers, walkie-talkies. Who authorized this? And wait till you hear the response from the State Department, by the way, because they're going to try to push back and try to pretend like, oh, we don't know about that or we don't want anything to do with it. But this is ridiculous. Do you guys realize they could do this to any country? Not just Lebanon. They can do this to any country. Let's send them these pagers and these walkie-talkies and they're explosive. That's insane.
It clearly dragged in, hit, targeted many civilians as well because of the indiscriminate nature of simultaneously detonating thousands of devices across populated areas. You are simply going to hit people that were not necessarily your military targets, and that may have been part or an accepted risk of a strategy like this. But today, for this to repeat is just going to amplify, I think, the sense of panic amongst ordinary Lebanese. But I believe you have Ben outside a hospital who I'm sure will be hearing more immediate ground truth.
Indeed, we do. And you set that up nicely, Nick. Thank you. I do want to go straight to Ben Wiedemann, who is outside a hospital in Beirut. And Ben, the fact that this is happening not just a second day in a row, but almost around the same time as what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, it's a bit later than it was yesterday, but what we're seeing is that there are reports of blasts at various locations around Lebanon, including Beirut in the south, in the Bekaa Valley in the eastern part of the country. Now, the official national news agency is describing the explosions taking place with what are called wireless devices. We believe they're talking about walkie-talkies. So it does appear that whereas yesterday the focus of these perhaps thousands of individual blasts was pagers, today it looks like it's walkie-talkies.
So they went from pagers to walkie-talkies, and that makes me question this. What other electronic device are they going to try to use? I mean, it could easily get in the hands of anyone, the wrong people. They're killing civilians again. So is it safe for people in Lebanon to turn on the radio? What about the TV? Like, this is insane. Can they get into their car and start their car? Make no mistake, the U.S. government is totally behind this. They'll pretend like, oh, we don't know. What? Oh, come on. Where do you think they got it from? This is a very dangerous precedent. Very dangerous.
Definitely, this is deepening the sense of insecurity that was very palpable in the aftermath of yesterday's pager bombings. And today, of course, we've seen, in addition to thousands of people wounded from yesterday's, now there are more injured. We don't have precise numbers at this time. It doesn't appear that the wave of bombings today was anything compared to what happened yesterday. Now, we're outside the American University of Beirut Medical Center, where we spoke with the chief medical officer here, who said that as many up to nearly 200 people were treated here, many of them with wounds to the face, to the eyes, to the hands, and also to the hip, because they were basically pulling out these pagers, looking at them, and then they were blowing up in their faces. So we've spoken with, for instance, the Minister of Health, who told us how difficult it has been for the authorities to deal yesterday with this wave of bombings. And of course, today, the challenge is still there, but obviously there are lots of people outside the hospital. We haven't seen any ambulances arriving here yet, but there are reports, for instance, of a funeral for one of the people killed yesterday, a funeral in the southern suburbs of Beirut, where many members of Hezbollah live. In that instance, eyewitnesses have told us that a man lost his arms in a blast there.
And appreciate the.
Okay, so this is crazy, you guys. It's very scary. But in a sense, it's almost like that's what they want. They want them to be afraid. They want them to be fearful. This is it's sad. It's sad. It's frightening. This is wrong. And I consider this to be, a war crime. Like, I'm pretty sure this is up there, like to use electronic devices. And what does that mean for security? What does that mean for our security? Like, you never know, like, what's going to happen. Now, the State Department, John Kirby, of course, he doesn't really want to talk about this, but you're in this position, John, so you got to do it. That's the job, John. Listen to this when he's questioned about the pager explosion. Listen.
Our sources have confirmed to us it's been widely reported that Israel is responsible for this, but notably you still won't say that. Why is that? Is it because that's not your assessment or because you don't support what they're doing here?
It's because I don't have anything more to add on this issue. As I said, there was no U.S. involvement, and I'm not going to go beyond that today.
Then let me ask this.
Even if there were, this is the thing, they're not going to tell you there was. Remember, Barack Obama told us after the fact and said, look, what did he say to you guys? What did he say after Libya? Barack Obama had a press conference and said, this is not easy, but look, the truth is we tortured some folks after the fact. But it's not like he's going to tell them this right now. When it comes to Israel committing crimes, John Kirby, the response from the State Department is, we'll have to look into that. We're asking Israel to investigate it, or I don't know anything about that. I have not heard about that. But when it comes to Hamas or Iran or Hezbollah, oh, they know everything down to the detail for a fact. But with Israel, I don't know. I don't know how these people live with themselves.
These kinds of tactics, blowing up pagers and walkie-talkies, is this type of warfare acceptable to the United States?
Again, Mary, I appreciate the question. I'm simply not going to be able to address these incidents over the last couple of days in any level of detail one way or another.
Okay, let me try one other thing.
Please.
You know, everyone keeps urging, all parties involved not to escalate this. Isn't this an escalation already? I mean, isn't this Israel doing exactly what you've been warning them not to do?
Again, I'm not going to speak to the details of these incidents. I understand that's frustrating. I get it. And I understand where all your questions are coming from. They're all valid. They're all fair. I'm just not going to get into this. I will add, if I could, and restate a little bit to what I said to Gabe. We still don't want to see an escalation of any kind. We don't believe that the way to solve where we're at in this crisis is by additional military operations at all. We still believe that the best way to prevent escalation, to prevent another front from opening up in Lebanon, is through diplomacy, which is why Mr. Hochstein was over in the region this week. And we're still going to pursue those kinds of outcomes.
This is very sad, really sad. They don't want to talk about it. We don't want to see escalation, but we continue to give them weapons. By the way, guys, we need to have a say-so in how our tax dollars are spent. They don't want an escalation, but they're sending them the weapons.
CBS News, at least, has learned that the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, spoke yesterday with the Israeli Defense Minister 2 different times. We've been told no specifics were given about the operation that happened yesterday. Was there any heads up given yesterday that there would be more attacks in Lebanon today?
Well, I refer you to the Defense Department to speak to conversations that the Secretary had with Minister Gallant. As I said, there was no U.S. involvement in either of these incidents, and I have nothing.
One thing, though, but awareness it was coming is another.
I recognize the question. I have nothing more to add.
So the answer is no. They weren't given a heads up prior to, which means the people did not have the opportunity to avoid it. And that is a problem. That is against, and again, if you look at the terms of war and you talk about what is considered to be against, international law, that is against international law. You cannot let the people not have a heads up. That is not right. The U.S. government is not following international law. Plain and simple. Israel is not following international law. The ICJ has implemented several rulings that said the occupation in Gaza, the occupation and control of the West Bank, it's illegal. They have said Israel has to do everything in their power to prevent genocide. And none of it matters because the U.S. government doesn't want to take any of the criticism towards Israel, even from the highest court. Our government made a big mistake many years ago when they decided to allow corporate money and lobbyists to take control of the politicians. That should have never happened. We should have never had super PACs. We should have never had these lobbyists such as the Israeli lobby, big pharma lobby. That should have never happened. Israel is dangerous, especially under the hands of Netanyahu, who's a complete lunatic. And if they won't listen to the U.S. government or heed the U.S. government warnings, if they're not going to listen to us, they're not going to listen to anyone. And you can't sit up there and tell them, don't do this, but here's the weapons.
If you're someone who owns a pager like this that's been blown up in Lebanon in recent days, whether it was made by the Taiwanese company or the Hungarian company that may have had a license, should you be concerned it could blow up?
Again, Ed, I have nothing more to add on this.
See, and this is the thing. It's a security issue. Now people are like, okay, so should we all be concerned? Should we be worried about this? Like, there was a message that I saw on social media asking people to boycott Motorola. I haven't used Motorola in a long time. Okay. So, but I don't even know if that in itself is the answer. I mean, the answer is Israel has to be held accountable. And our government refuses to do it because they all belong to the Israeli lobby. I am very concerned as to where this is going to lead. Very concerned. I believe that before we ever see any type of peace or solution in the Middle East, I think it's going to get worse first.